And welcome to another episode of the Council of Trent podcast. I'm your host, Catholic Answers apologist and speaker, Trent Horn. And one of my goals through my work as a Christian apologist, as a Catholic apologist, and someone who's been doing this podcast now for over 2 years, is to help people, especially Catholics, really all people, have better conversations about their faith with other people. That's why on this podcast we have had on non-Catholics, we've spoken to atheists, we've spoken to pro-LGBT pastors. On Catholic Answers Live on my radio show, I routinely talk to people, and I do these shows. Why aren't you Catholic? Why are you an atheist? Why are you pro-choice? And I believe that even though we disagree, in the world we live in, we all disagree about a lot of things. But I'm hoping that we can agree at least on the importance of having civil, productive conversations. So that is why I'm super excited for my guest today. A few months ago, I wrote on social media that I'm working on a book right now, a book project I'm writing for atheists. And I wanted to sit down with different atheists and find out what they believe, why they believe it, and just get to know their worldview better and just have a better interaction with them. And one of the people on social media proposed that I speak with Anthony Magnabosco, who is a street epistemologist. I've been familiar with Anthony's work a little bit here and there, but their suggestion got me back into looking at his videos. And Anthony practices something that's very similar to what I've done for many years, that he engages people in a very calm and gracious way using the Socratic method. Though he himself is an atheist, he wants to present the atheist worldview through what I think is a very effective method for presenting any worldview. And you can go to his YouTube channel, just look up Street Epistemology, Anthony Magnabosco, and you'll be able to find it and see what he does. So I wanted Anthony to come on the show today because what I wanted to talk about is essentially how he does what he does and how Christians and atheists can have better conversations with one another. At the very least, in spite of our disagreements, we should be able to have better conversations with one another in an age and a time where it's sometimes hard to have good conversations. So, Anthony, welcome to the Council of Trent podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here. I don't think I've done many interviews with theists about street epistemology, and I've been doing this for 7 years or so. And it's really nice to be on your show and to talk to you.
Yeah, it's really good to have you because mostly just what I appreciate seeing how you engage other people is that this is kind of, I can imagine that if I had taken a different turn in life, if I had embraced atheism rather than Christianity, your approach might be similar to the one that I hopefully would have adopted, because it's kind of similar to the approach that I engage in when I talk to people on radio and ask them, why are they an atheist or why aren't they Catholic? So tell us a little bit about street epistemology and how you got into it and what you try to do with it.
Absolutely. Street epistemology is not something that I created, but I discovered from reading a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists, a very shocking, in-your-face title that fortunately, I think, cut through the noise, and I was able to discover it, and other people were able to discover this book. It purported a better way of conversing with people rather than giving people facts or arguing your point, showing somebody what you found convincing about their position, that their position isn't true, rather than arguing with a person or ridiculing them, actually asking them questions. So this was an approach that appealed to me at the time because prior to learning street epistemology, I was having horrible conversations with the loved ones in my life about serious topics like religion and politics and so forth. So the discovery of that book coincided perfectly with where I was in life because I was having very difficult conversations with folks and I was looking for a better way. And this book purported to be an alternate way of conversing with folks. So I read the book and I started going out and with my camera engaging with street preachers to see, does this book really work? Will these techniques work with believers? And what I began to discover over the years is that the technique does seem to be very effective. People love to talk about their position. They love to explain how they got to these views. And I was just enamored with it. My conversations have never been better from adopting this approach. I can't imagine ever honestly going back to an argumentative debate.
Hmm.
It's changed me also. And that's been a good thing. Now, so what I'd like to do these days is show people how to use this approach, regardless of where you stand on a claim, and particularly God. I would love it if theists would use this approach. And it sounds like you're using something similar. And maybe that's why we're talking. Maybe you've noticed some
Yeah. Well,
things, and we can talk about that.
what's funny is when I've tried to speak with Christians and I've tried to help Christians to share their faith with other people, a lot of times I think there's two different kinds of people out there who, when you ask them questions about their faith, I think the vast majority, including the people that you run into when you do street epistemology, is I believe what I believe, I have faith, and I just believe it because I believe it, and that's that basically. And there's not a lot of substance to the belief. It's just something that I believe. And I think that's the vast majority of people. It's just religion is essentially a kind of custom for them. Well, then when you ask people questions, why do they believe? You realize, hey, where are my reasons for this? But then a smaller subset would be Christians who, once they realize, hey, I don't like that I don't have reasons, they go out and get a bunch of reasons, and then they practice apologetics. And I go to places all the time, and usually it's only in the Christian apologetic community or the atheistic community people even know what apologetics is. You ask a normal person, like, what's apologetics? Like, I don't know, you just say you're sorry for stuff? Well, no, that's not apologetics. And also the other bad definition I say is apologetics is not making the other guy sorry he asked you why you believe in God. And which is the same thing I have with atheists, which is an apologist for atheism shouldn't be someone you make the other guy sorry he got into a conversation with you about atheism, that they go out there with all these facts and arguments and proofs and try to club other people over the head with them. And what I usually tell Christians is you don't need to have all the right answers to share your faith. You just need to have the right questions. And I think that's the key. And so I think we operate with a very similar approach. I want to share a clip. So let's see. I'll get Nick, our wonderful sound engineer here. Let's go with Nick, clip number 2. And this is a dialogue you had with a Christian apologetics student, actually. And your method, I liked it because you asked him and you got, figuring out why he believes what he believes, but you discover what might be a hidden presupposition within his arguments, and you just wanted him to see that. So let's play that clip.
No, one thing that it seems like I'm picking up on is that the standard, you got two paths here, right?
Right.
The standard for going down this path of evolution is freaking high. The standard for dismissing that and going with this other one of God,
Right.
maybe not so quite high. Not as quite high as the evolution one. Am I off on that?
Well,
Are you using two different standards?
am I using two different standards? So
here's what I thought was interesting about this, and I want to get your comment on it. You don't get a lot of atheists would want to jump in and say,
by the way.
"Yeah,
I love that talk.
It's a good one."
Yeah.
Would want to get into the subject of, well, here's why evolution is true. Here's all the evidence for evolution. But that's not what you do. You go deeper to try to find that there might be a contradiction or a problematic association with beliefs. Am I getting this right? What your method is?
Well, it kind of relates back to what you were saying about when people give reasons and maybe they discover that they don't have good reasons and then they go find better ones. What we find, and this is something that I think most humans do, when we're asked to give reasons why we think something is true, we may be giving the reasons that we think are the reasons that we should give and not necessarily are really the reasons. And one of the things you'll notice in street epistemology exchanges is that we try to spend a lot of time making sure we're exploring the real reason that's bolstering your confidence in the claim that it's true. So in the case there with that fellow, I think he had mentioned that the world looks intelligently designed and evolution can't certainly be true. So it's really important to make sure that I don't spend a lot of time talking with somebody about evolution when he wouldn't find that convincing. So I think we probably broached that subject, and I think we probably advanced to another stage where we're determining, is he being consistent with his standards when he decides to accept or to reject evolution, but accept the claim that a God just started all of this. So that's a really good example there that you played, because it seems like we reached the point where he confirmed that this really is the reason why he thinks his God is real, because evolution isn't true and it looks like things are designed. Mm-hmm. So it's really important when we're having these dialogues, and this I think applies to the larger discussion that we're having today, is to make sure we're exploring the real reasons why somebody's holding the view. And a lot of times we don't do that. I might assume, well, okay, maybe for me personally as Anthony, I found this compelling. So when I dialogue with Trent, I'm going to make sure that I talk about the thing that I found convincing. That's a mistake, because I mean, I might get lucky and that might be the same thing that you find compelling, but it probably isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really important to listen to hear what's bolstering up these views in the first place.
And that's something you do well in conversations that I would agree anyone listening to us, whether you are a Christian or an atheist, is when we're in conversations, I find a lot of times we're not listening to the other person, especially when it gets into these religious debates. What happens is when the other guy's talking, we're thinking, okay, what's my reply? What's my counter? What's my rebuttal? And then when that happens, we're just going, we end up talking past each other. Whereas you had an inviting question, and then this guy's able to just sit and think, oh, am I using two different standards? I could tell that he was doing what is, I'm sure is your goal of street epistemology, the same I do as Socratic method. I want that person to stop and they're reflecting upon their own beliefs. That's what we want people to do.
Exactly. It doesn't do me or that fellow or anyone else that we speak with any good if we assume that we know what their position is. And there's a real value. So I think in that clip, I said something like, what I think is going on here is that it seems like you're doing this and this. Is that the case? Rather than saying, dude, you're using two different standards. You're being inconsistent. That's a logical fallacy or whatever. Rather than being accusatory, I want to be a partner in the exploration of his views. And that's a significant mind shift. And it takes a lot of discipline. Yes. You probably know if you're using the Socratic method,
yes,
you must be aware how difficult it is to say, oh, I've just got this piece of information that'll just clinch it for them. But if that's not what they're finding compelling, it's probably a waste of your time at this juncture, I suppose.
No, I want to ask them the question, and I want them to see this is the thing that really matters. And that's the thing, that after I'm done talking with this person, or after you're done talking with this person, you're going to leave a pebble in their shoe. It's something they're going to wrestle with. And that's the key, I think. Both Christians and atheists miss this in the conversations. We're probably not going to convince the other guy right there as we're talking to him. But what the question we ask him or her, that's going to convince them as they have to wrestle with it after we're done talking. Do you think?
Right. I think so. And I think that's one of the counterintuitive things about this approach is that we've probably spent a lot of time thinking about the positions that we hold. And we have our top 5 arguments just at the ready to go. And you have to set all this stuff aside. You have to really listen to what your conversation partner is finding convincing and what reasons they're using and what method they're using to validate those reasons. And that seems to be the best way to go about it. Because if you can speak in your conversation partner's language, and you're actually listening to them and you're repeating it back to make sure that you fully understand it. You're not building a straw man to knock over. You're helping them build their biggest argument. If you can do all of that, they're going to feel listened to. And if they discover that they don't have a good reason or they haven't used a reliable method for validating that reason, they're going to probably be a little bit more open to taking a second look at it. And you're absolutely right. This is not about belief revision for the purpose of belief revision or just tearing down people's arguments left and right. It's about having a dialogue that opens them up just enough where you can place that pebble and let them address it. You'll probably notice in many of my videos, I like to end it on particular moments of reflection, or it seems like we've exhausted things, or maybe they're even a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah, I call this reaching an impasse when I have these conversations. Sometimes we'll go, we're at an impasse, or there's the discomfort has started to rise above an acceptable level, I might describe it. And here, I want it to leave. I want the conversation to end with comfort, not with only mild discomfort, not like I'm grilling.
That's such a good way of putting it.
Yeah, not like I'm grilling this person, but it's just a mild discomfort of, I got to think this through. I guess you're thinking the same thing.
Yeah, somebody once described street epistemology as helping people become comfortably uncomfortable. Comfortable enough to the point where they they seem to enjoy the conversation. They don't feel like they were trapped or tricked or anything or attacked in any way.
Right.
Yet uncomfortable enough where they're left wondering about their views, and that yes, maybe they go investigate it, or maybe they back off of their confidence a little bit. Maybe they even discard the belief outright. That's even happened.
Right.
Not necessarily on the spot, though.
Yeah, I think you and I both agree that for the vast majority of people, most people are going to want to save face, whether they are a theist or an atheist, whatever the position may be. And also, it may not be that your entire position is false. It could be your position is true, but part of your position has a false element built into it. So, for example, I mean, you believe that atheism is true, or at least that theism is false, and yet there's people who could hold to various defenses of atheism that rest on false claims, like believing things like, oh, Christians, have inhibited science. They used to tell people that the earth was flat. And it's like, well, actually, Christians never really said that. It's possible for each of us to have various false claims, but for someone, if they're really committed and they're kind of a firebrand, to not want to admit that right there. Instead, you want to give them something to think about. Then later, they're like, oh, yeah, maybe that wasn't entirely right. In fact, let me play a clip to show another example of how you use street epistemology. This is from the tutorial you gave to Aaron Raw. So Aaron Raw, for our listeners who don't know, is an atheist, YouTuber. He does a lot of work critiquing fundamentalism, defending the theory of evolution, and he's definitely a firebrand atheist. He does not, he doesn't hold punches. He
very aggressive style he has. Yes.
So he told his followers, "Hey, people say I'm too aggressive." I went and got my friend Anthony here. He showed me street epistemology, and you guys had an engagement, and he was talking about how he had a conversation with a Christian, and the reason the Christian was a Christian was because he believed that Christianity is the oldest religion in the world. And even I know that's actually not true. But that's not correct. I mean, first of all, Judaism is older than Christianity. But even if you looked at Judeo-Christianity, there are older mythologies, older belief systems. And Aaron was saying, look, I just wanted to show him, nope, that's actually not true. And you made the point that's not the route you actually should go to have a productive conversation. So why don't we play that clip 1.
Okay, so the claim is, I'm a Christian because it's the oldest religion. So the question would be, if it could be shown to your satisfaction that there is an older religion than Christianity, would you abandon your belief or lower your confidence? Get them to buy into some sort of action. Get them to commit to changing their mind if they could be shown otherwise. More than likely, his response would be, no. I believe it because that's one thing, but it's really, I was raised that way, and I go to it and I get a good feeling whenever I go to church. Okay, now we know we don't have to spend any time explaining the difference between Hinduism and Christianity. We could focus on the deeper levels. And that's all that street epistemology is. It's peeling back the layers to get to the root cause of why they believe. And almost always when it's a religious claim, it's faith.
Okay, that was the point I liked when you said it's about peeling back the layers. And I think that's what we should do with everybody's beliefs, whether it's theistic or Christian, or actually whether it's atheistic. What do you think?
Absolutely. And to piggyback, to go back just really quickly to something you said, I want to be really clear. When we're using this approach, there's a distinction needs to be made between the truth of the claim and the confidence that we have in the claim. Because you're right, we could discover that we have a woefully horrible reason or an unreliable process to conclude that something is true, and are determined maybe that our confidence isn't justified in thinking that it's true, and it actually be true.
Right.
So, for example, I'm planning to release. It could be dumb luck. Like when I ran into the LDS missionaries the other day, I'm going to release the video later this week. They have there's a verse in their book that says how they can go out and verify that the Book of Mormon is true, and they could go about it in a very unscientifically testable way and have a false sense of confidence, and it still might actually be true. So I want to just make a distinction here that this approach is really good for assessing the confidence in claims and not necessarily determining yes or no that's factually true or not.
Okay. What I want to do now is let's talk a little bit more about the method in areas where you and I might disagree. I don't even know if we would disagree necessarily, but you see how it's applied, especially maybe where it's applied to atheists, for example. So sometimes I'll ask atheist questions, and it's hard for me to get. Sometimes I'll encounter atheists, and they'll tell me I don't have a burden of proof at all for the atheism that I hold. I don't have any burden of proof whatsoever. That's completely on you. And I don't think that that's the case, because I would say that even if you're purely rejecting a claim, atheism still has some kind of positive claim about it, like this. You might put atheism this way positively. There are no rationally compelling reasons to believe in God, or there are no reasons I have seen for me that would compel me to believe in God. Now, to me, that seems like a claim that one would have to say, well, why? Well, how do you know that's the case, that there are no good reasons for God? Do you think atheists have a burden of defending that claim if they make it?
I'm not a big fan of the lack of belief definition for atheists. I'm completely fine personally saying, I believe that there are no gods because I've found all the evidence that's been presented thus far to justify that claim insufficient. So if that means that I need to accept a burden of some sort, I think I could probably adequately explain the reasons that I'm often presented by theists for thinking that God is real, and being able to adequately explain how I don't find those convincing. So I really have no problem going that far. I do sense, I mean, I see it. I see a lot of resistance from atheists being really careful with that definition and making sure that they don't take on a claim. Now, saying, I know that there are no gods is different than I believe that there are no gods. I think when you say, I know this for a fact that there are no gods, then you've absolutely taken on a burden. And then even if you say, I believe that there are no gods, I think that there is a little bit of a burden there. I don't mind taking on the burden, in short, not at all. I feel like I could adequately explain why I don't find the common arguments for a God convincing.
Do you think there's a difference between the claim, I believe there are no gods, and I don't know if there are any gods?
Yes. Well, yes, because the second one is talking about knowledge. So if you were saying, yeah, there's definitely a difference there, I think.
Well, I guess because for me, to believe there is not something is to make, because knowledge is at its most basic level justified true belief. It might be more than that, but it's at its most basic level, you and I could say knowledge is justified true belief. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that definition.
Yeah. So to say I believe there are no gods, to me that it seems like a kind of knowledge claim. Like if I was to say, I believe there are, like I think the claim, I believe there are no aliens in the universe is different than the claim, I don't know if they're aliens. Like one seems to be a complete suspension of judgment. Another one, I would think you got to have some reasons behind the idea, I believe there are no aliens, you know, and then there might be a confidence difference there.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned confidence, because I try to view these things in terms of a scale of confidence in my understanding that it's factually true. Not that I know it. I think a knowledge claim is something that you either know it or you don't. I don't know that there's a God. I also don't know that there's not a God. However, I can rank my confidence level, I think, on a scale from like 0 to 100.
That's good, because that's something I've asked atheists like online. And then it's hard for me to get a straight answer. So I've asked people, you know, what is the probability God exists? And I would think for an atheist, it'd be somewhere between 0% and 50%. So 0% would be, it's impossible for there to be a God, just as much as it's impossible for there to be a square circle. And 50% would be a pure suspension of judgment. Like, I don't know, maybe. It could easily go either way for me. And then it's, for some, it could be like 0.00001%, 10%. It would depend on the person. Would you be able to put yourself somewhere on that line?
This gets murky really quick. So I think when we're talking about the God, does a God exist? This is a yes-no proposition. Either it's true or false.
Sure.
So that, I think, is related to a knowledge claim of some sort. So Do I know that one exists? No, I don't know. I don't know that one exists or doesn't exist. I'm agnostic on it. I'm going to throw that term in there just to muddy this even more, not intentionally. And then when it comes to my belief, I try to look at it as a scale of confidence. So my current level of belief fluctuates. My level of belief fluctuates, and currently I'd say it's like at a 2 out of 100. And I can probably give reasons why I'm at a 2, and I can probably explain what would move me up to a 40 or a 60 or a 90.
A 2 and 100 would be what? That God exists, or what does that mean? 2 out of 100.
In my level of confidence that a God exists. Yes.
Okay, so it's not 0. It's not impossible.
Right. Which I think if I said I'm a 0, I'm now making or 100 for that matter. I think at that point we're making knowledge claims of certainty about the case.
Sure.
And I don't think you'll ever hear me say I'm at a 0 or a 100 on anything.
Why do you pick 2 instead of maybe a higher number like 25, 30, 40? You're even getting 50 just straight down the middle. I don't know. It could like for me, like with aliens, I could even be a 50 there. The universe is gigantic. But then again, I wonder why they haven't contacted us. Maybe it's because the universe is huge. So aliens somewhere in the universe, I could go 50-50 on that one. But I think a lot of atheists are not willing to go 50-50 on the existence of God. So it's like there's other reasons that push the confidence level far down.
Well, okay, so if we're going to spend more time on this, then to look at the confidence level, try to envision it as a scale, a sliding scale.
Sure.
So, for example, how confident were you yesterday that I was going to join you for this podcast? Like we hadn't talked for maybe like a week or so.
Yeah, I probably had a 60% more than likely you would be here.
And then if I didn't reply to your email asking, "Hey, are we still on for today?"
I'd still go to 51. I have faith. I have faith in Anthony Magnabosco.
Oh, okay. That's a whole other onion to peel.
Well, we should get to that soon because that comes up a lot in your conversations. But let's finish this up and talk about faith. So, yeah, I'm just wondering with you, like, yeah, because I always ask atheists, like, where would you put yourself? Like, if, like, to me, that does seem like you could say the existence of God, it's very improbable. You know, I don't know if you would. You're not.
I honestly
just
don't know
not
how I would determine the probability of a God existing.
You're just not confident.
I beg your pardon?
You're just not confident. That's one thing you can be sure on.
Right. I think my confidence level is rather low. And if you're asking me why I'm at a 2, I think you asked me that. I'll just answer that.
Sure.
Because I meet a lot of people who do believe in gods, and I'm fallible. I could be mistaken. They could be right. I'm fallible on a lot of things. Just ask my family. They tell me all the time that how could you not smell that? You know, and I just don't smell it. I don't have a good sense of smell. So there are a lot of people who believe in gods, which makes me think, well, maybe I'm missing something. But then when I think about it, just like in that example of the oldest religion doesn't necessarily make it true. Just because a lot of people believe something doesn't make it true either. It's not a really good reason.
Sure.
But just all this being said, I'm completely open to moving from that 2 to a 90 or something.
Sure.
And we can probably get into what it would take if you want to go that way. But I'm not rigidly locked into it. And here being on your show saying there are absolutely no gods. I'm completely open to the possibility of it being the case.
You just haven't seen good reasons.
I haven't seen sufficient reasons for it. Yeah, Trent, that's it.
Yeah, because there's a set of questions I like asking atheists, and maybe this could be a fun one for you, because I think this might be a fun extracurricular for you to do with your videos. Maybe you could do it at an atheistic convention sometimes. But to do street epistemology asking atheists the grounds for their atheism. And so some questions, so some mine are, you know, where would your confidence in believing or not believing in God, why do you put it there and not somewhere else? Here's another question I ask, and I get funny replies to this. I used to say, what is the best or strongest argument for God you've encountered and what's wrong with it, briefly. But a lot of atheists have told me, this is funny, they say, well, that's like asking what the best poison is. Or the best serial killer. And I'm like,
well, if that doesn't release or show a bias there, geez.
To which I've said also, well, you can talk about the best poison is the one that can kill with the lowest dose, or the best serial killer is the one with the highest body count. You're right. It reveals kind of a bias. So sometimes I've phrased it now as like, or they'll say there's just no good ones. I'm like, well, they can't all be equally strong or weak. I mean, they're different. So sometimes I'll say, like, what's the least bad one you've encountered? So what would be your reply, since you've heard a lot of different reasons?
Well, it would be the one that I just gave. The one that's keeping me at the two is that there's a lot of people that believe it. I think that's a somewhat compelling reason. But then when I look at all the people who believe in different gods for essentially the same reasons and the same methods, it makes me think, gosh, it's just such a horrible reason, but I have to give it a little bit of weight. But I think it's a question that atheists need to be prepared to answer. What would it take to change your mind? What would move you up from a 2 to a 98? I think you should have an answer. We absolutely should have an answer. Oh, and by the way, I have interviewed atheists.
Oh, really?
100% sure there's no God. Yeah, there's a playlist on my channel.
I haven't seen that one. I'm going to have to watch it.
Also, I can send you the link to it afterwards. And after a 10-minute talk with an atheist, there's one video example where she said, now that I'm talking to you, I don't know if I could be 100% sure that there's no God.
Are there any atheists that would consider you a traitor for that? I wouldn't think so, but I think it'd be unexpected to see people questioning the tribe's belief.
When I uploaded the video, I was thinking about it a little bit, like, what's going to be the reaction to this? And honestly, the reaction was extremely supportive, because we need to challenge all of our positions regardless of where we stand on it. Yeah. And that includes atheists as well. And this tool of street epistemology is not just for atheists to challenge Christians or theists. We use this on our own beliefs all the time.
Right.
And that was just a really good video example. And of course, it's useful when I have interviews like this with theists who say, how come you aren't using this with atheists? And of course we are.
Okay. And I apologize. I hadn't come across that on the playlist. So I'm definitely going to want to check that out. But yeah, so these questions, and this is a good one. I think this would be a great one for you to ask atheists. And I'm curious to have your answer, because I've asked atheists, okay, well, here's how I see where it can be hard when Christians and atheists talk to each other. An atheist says, show me evidence that God exists. And the problem is, and it's kind of similar, I see a variant of this when atheists try to explain why evolution is true to fundamentalists. A fundamentalist will say, show me evidence for evolution. But if a Christian fundamentalist has set the bar so impossibly high that you need to show me every single transitional form for every fossil, or I won't believe evolution unless I see a time-lapse video of it happening. It's like, well, if you've restricted the evidence to only things I don't have, you've set the bar arbitrarily high. And so I think for Christians, we would ask atheists, well, if nothing would convince you, then we can't really have a conversation. So yeah, what would increase your confidence from a 2 to get up to the 80s or the 90s or something like that?
It probably wouldn't be discovering something in a book. I'll have to tell you that. I don't find the fact that things are written in books that this is what people believed at the time, I just don't find that compelling. I would need something repeatable and testable. So let's say that a God was able to, come down and heal some kids that are sick. That would probably increase my confidence. If we can go to the cancer ward right now and see this God heal people, which I think the God would be capable of doing, I think that would move me up from the 2. Would it move me to a 100? No, but it would certainly move me up probably to like the high 80s or 90s. Now, the skeptic in me would be wondering, which God is actually doing this? Even if there wasn't a God there, but we were praying to a specific God and people were being healed, how can we actually be so sure that that was the God that we were praying to do it? So I would still have questions, but it would move me up.
But I guess what's hard for me is, okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. Why would you find it convincing if someone like me stands in a hospital and I pray over 3 people and I say, Jesus, heal them of cancer. So I have uttered words, Jesus, heal them of cancer. And then a month later, we see their cancer is completely gone. Why is that? Why does that make you think God exists, or make it more likely?
Well, I would need more than 3, and it would have to be repeatable and testable. So maybe we can actually repeat this 1,000 times, perhaps, rather than 3 times, and maybe the healings would happen in a shorter amount of time. I'm giving you examples of things that would move me up a little bit from the 2, but as far as like 100% convinced that it's the case, then it would be difficult for me to actually verbalize what it would be. There's the typical sort of atheist trope that you hear that, well, a God would know what it would take to convince me. I'm sure have you heard that before?
Yes, I have heard that one.
Which is actually not that bad. However, I do still think that atheists should be able to verbalize what would move them up a little bit.
Yeah, because it could also be the case that the set of things that would change a person's mind is empty. And even God can't know an empty set because there's nothing there to know, or it just might be unreasonable things. But I guess for me, I would wonder, why would the thing that would make you believe God exists, why are the qualities repeatable and testable important?
Well, because I'd want to make sure that I wasn't believing something that I maybe wanted to be true, or maybe perhaps I was being tricked. So I would love it if the thing that would move me up in my confidence could also be experienced by other people. If this was only something that you can demonstrate in front of me when you're praying for 3 kids, for example, it might move me up a little bit, I suppose. 15%, 20%. But if we can do a worldwide tour and there's people around watching this, and this was something that we can reproduce, I think that there's that component to it that I think legitimizes it more.
But
there's also this.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say the ability to test it to see if it's really doing what we think is doing that. Even if we can verify that children are being cured of cancer, I'd still be wondering if the explanation that we're coming up with is really the explanation.
Right, because so far the only thing you have observed is the uttering of words and the
healing of children.
Right, so why wouldn't you just say it is the uttering of words that causes this rather than some immaterial divine being? Because there it seems like you'd have to infer now an unseen force behind the thing that we did see.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'd have to really come up with some sort of rigorous testing about how to go about how to go about making sure that is it the words that's doing it? Is there something magical about the words that triggers cancer cells into responding? Is there some sort of natural explanation to this? Who really knows?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I guess here's what's hard for me is I agree that scientific investigation, things that are repeatable and testable, can yield a vast amount of knowledge for us, and oftentimes very reliable. Sometimes not reliable. You could actually Google the replication crisis in science. If there's there's some peer-reviewed, you're familiar with, there's peer-reviewed articles that people, and this happens more in like the social sciences than like with chemistry or biology. Like when you boil water, you're going to get it boiling at 100 degrees Celsius. That's, we're pretty set on that. But when you deal, like, especially with findings in the social sciences, when people have tried to replicate these experiments, they actually get vastly different results. And so, overturning things. So, however, I do agree there are many cases where we can be repeatable, testable. Science gives us knowledge. But I don't think that's either our surest kind of knowledge or the only kind of knowledge that's out there. Because
what's a better way?
Well, one would be mathematical knowledge isn't something we do tests on. We run proofs. So a lot of when we try to figure out proving different theorems, for example, we do mathematical computations. And I think mathematical knowledge is surer than scientific knowledge. It only takes, one black swan to overturn something you figured out. And science is always very tentative. Once you could have a scientific conclusion, but then it could get overturned with a discovery 100 or 50 years later. Mathematical knowledge is something, we got the Pythagorean theorem's been true since Pythagoras, and it's not going anywhere, But then I think that there's other kinds of knowledge that we have. We have sensory knowledge and experience of things. We could also be in a position, let me know what you think of this. Could we be in a position where a person could know something is true, but be unable to show it's true to other people? Is it possible you might be in a position like that?
I'm not sure if that's possible.
Well, imagine you're accused of a crime you didn't commit, and like the evidence to any rational jury convicts you, but you have evidence of yourself that you didn't do it, but nobody else believes you. In most cases, you wouldn't doubt yourself. It just stinks that you have evidence only you have access to. It'd be great if other people had access to this evidence, but they don't. So you don't blame them; they don't believe you. It just stinks you can't prove to them what you know to be true for yourself. I think there could be cases like that.
Absolutely, and I meet a lot of people who will give personal experience as the reason why they think that their claim is true, whether it's a god or something else.
Sure.
We could even be talking about ghosts or aliens or karma or whatever.
Yeah.
But the personal experience thing is a common reason that people give.
Sure.
And one thing that I try to do is not to diminish or blow off the personal experience that they think that they had.
Mm-hmm.
They likely had some sort of personal experience. It kind of goes back to the praying for kids in the hospital. How can we be sure that the reason or the explanation that you're giving for the personal experience is indeed that reason? How did you rule out other explanations for that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's, and I also think it must be frustrating for people who think that they had a personal experience with a deity, and it's the main reason why they think that it's true. Mm-hmm. But nobody really takes them very seriously because they didn't have it. I can imagine that would be extremely frustrating.
I could see that'd be frustrating, and although I wouldn't blame atheists for not believing in God because of somebody else's personal experience. For example, I get jealous of other believers who have these personal experiences of God. You know, you got the hands up and, because I'm just not wired that way. I just don't get the warm fuzzies. It's just very rare and far between does it happen. I'm not going to diminish it by saying they're just a bunch of warm fuzzies. I think sometimes some religious experiences are purely natural in origin. But I don't think that all religious experiences are like that way. And I think that someone could have a justified belief in the existence of God, who is perfect goodness and desires them to be good as well, exists and gives them meaning, and they just feel that, and they've experienced it. And some people have experienced it in veridical ways, encounters with the demonic or with spiritual beings. And for me,
sure,
I wouldn't be able to verify it, but that could be just fine evidence for them. Much the same way, if someone says they have an encounter with an extraterrestrial, I'm not going to be like, that's stupid. I don't know. It's a big universe.
Tell me a little bit more about it. What exactly happened?
Right. Is it sleep?
Would you find the same story compelling if it came from somebody else and they were giving a completely different explanation for it?
Right.
And then back to what we started off originally.
Yeah.
I might actually do a check to make sure that that's really leading to your confidence, or would it subtract from your confidence if we actually explored the personal experience that you think that you had?
Right.
And I'm on board with you thinking that you had it. Something happened to you. If we actually discovered together that there was a different explanation for it and it wasn't your God, would you lower your confidence in the claim that God exists? More than likely, people will say, well, no, I'd be just as confident. Now, you will occasionally meet people who say, well, you know, if we looked into it and we figured out that there was a leaky gas main in my neighborhood at the time and that was causing people to have hallucinations, then that would significantly drop my confidence to like a 40% that this God is real. Mm-hmm. Then I might continue exploring that reason. But more than likely, there are other reasons why. And this might be a good time to get into faith if you wanted to go there.
Yeah, we can talk about that, because I think sometimes, and this is related to Peter Boghossian's book, A Manual for Creating Atheists, where he criticizes faith. And I think a lot of times Christians and atheists talk past one another when we talk about having faith. Because you'll ask people, why do they believe in God? They'll say, well, I have faith. And I think what they mean is they have faith or trust in something that grounds their belief. Because I've seen in your videos where you'll ask people these counterfactuals, like, if you didn't have this evidence against evolution, or if you didn't have this personal evidence,
if we found an older religion, would you find that one more compelling than Christianity?
And they'll go back to faith. Well, I have faith. I mean, I guess
faith seems to be.
But then you could ask them, so if it turned out you didn't have faith, would you believe in God? I think most of them would, I guess, say no. Have you ever got drilled that deep?
Oh yeah, but when somebody mentions faith in particular, that's one of those suitcase words that have to be unpacked.
Yes. These
days, or even like the last 3 years, if you look at any of my videos the last 3 or 4 years now, when somebody brings up faith, and I don't tend to bring up that word. Mm-hmm. I want to see if they bring it up.
Sure.
And I've had theists who have never brought it up. They think that they have evidence for it. But when they bring up the word faith, even though I have my own definition of that word, I will ask what theirs is and use it. This goes back to not wanting to strawman somebody.
Yeah.
I want to figure out the meaning of the words that they're using, engage with them in a dialogue where I'm asking questions, using all of their terms, all of their reasons, not misrepresenting them at all.
Right.
And their definition of faith could be completely different than the one that you just gave or the one that I might use.
Sure.
And I will adopt their definition of that word. And if they're using it as a noun, for example, I'm of the Catholic faith,
right.
Fine. Then again, they may say faith is required. Faith is what you need in order to put all the pieces together. It's the hub of the wheel, so to speak.
It's a verb.
They may be using it as a verb, or they may be using it as a method. How do I know that the Bible's true? Well, I take it on faith that it is. That's my methodology. And then I ask their definition of it, and then we can get into the reliability of that method.
What is the common definition of faith you hear from Christians then if you ask them what they mean by faith?
Thank you for asking me that, rather than thinking that I'm foisting definitions on people, because I definitely don't do that. The most common definition I get, there's several. So if you'll just bear with me,
Sure.
I hear people say that it's belief without evidence, and these are theists. These are not atheist foisted definitions. Theists will say it's believing something when you don't have a way to prove it. It's believing something that you have no evidence for. It's hope. It's trust. Faith is, gosh, I'm kind of running out of other.
It's what closes the gap.
I've even heard that. Faith is that last little bit that you need to get to certainty that God is real. I have all this other evidence, but faith is the cherry on top of that sundae. So it depends. I try to go where my conversation partners take me.
Sure. And for me, I just define faith very broadly because I don't think it's a strictly religious idea. I would just say faith is a trust or confidence in someone or something, and the object of one's faith can vary greatly. So, like, for
Would you
example,
like to know my definition of faith?
Your definition?
Have you heard mine?
I haven't heard yours. I'm interested to see if it's different than Peter Boghossian's.
I don't like Peter's definitions of faith, and
I don't like them either. But so for Peter, so Boghossian says faith. He uses the definition. It's one definition he uses is that I think is the worst is pretending to know what you don't know.
Right.
And I really can't stand that one because the idea of pretending to do something seems to accuse the person of being involved in malice or deceit.
Self-deception even.
Yeah, like pretending, like if I pretend to be Santa Claus, I, grab the thing behind me and I put it on and I'm deceiving people. But pretending to know what you don't know would involve, it's like deception or con artistry. Whereas I could just be mistaken. I thought I knew something, but it turns out I didn't know that, I always thought Mark Twain said that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth has time to put its shoes on. I thought, I know Mark Twain said that. But it turns out it wasn't Mark Twain. It was Jonathan Swift who said it. So I wasn't pretending to know that. I thought I knew, but I was mistaken. But anywho, you would say what faith is.
Yeah, the second definition that Boghossian offers is belief without evidence. I think he gives two definitions. Yeah. In any case, I don't care what anyone's definitions are of those words unless I'm speaking with them.
Right.
Now, my definition of faith, based on nearly 1,000 conversations of talking to people, is trust that's untestable or untestable trust. So in the case of us going to a hospital where we're praying for somebody and they're getting healed, I might take it on faith or trust that it's the God that we were praying to that was healing the kids. However, I don't think that I'd have the ability to test that trust. I don't think that I'd have the ability to actually disconfirm that. So faith, in the way that I see faith being used by theists when they equate it with trust, it tends to only work in one direction. It confirms what I think is the case, but there's no way to actually test it. And that, I think, is the distinction.
Well, I think that it depends what you mean by that, that anytime we have faith in something, whether it's religious or not, it's because we have a confidence. It's always going to go in that one direction. And as I said, I don't believe faith is a strictly religious concept. There's that song by George Michael, I've got to have faith, the faith, the faith. I've got to have faith, faith, the faith. That's not a him. He's just got to, I got to have trust in my partner that they're not going to work me over in this romantic relationship. So I think, I had faith that you were going to be on the show today,
Right.
and I couldn't test that you were going to be there or not because you're not purely subject to natural laws, I guess. So what are examples of things that we don't have faith in? I guess maybe like properly basic experiences, like I'm thinking or I'm talking to you, or.
I mean, I think there are certain things that we assume are the case. We think that there's some constants in the universe with regards to gravity, and that when I go to bed, I'll wake up the next day and I'm the same person, and my memories weren't just implanted in me 5 minutes ago. I think that there are certain assumptions that we make that is that faith. This actually came up in a conversation that I had with Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic. If anyone wants to dig deeper into this, I replied to the interview that we did together on his video where I get into this. There's presuppositions or assumptions that I think we make that I guess you could say we're trusting that they're the case, and I have no way of testing it. That's kind of why I think untestable trust is such a good definition. Did you really use faith that I was going to be here today? I'm not sure, because I think it was actually a testable proposition. If I didn't show up, or if I messaged you to say I'm feeling really sick, I can't make it, that there's a feedback loop to you so that you can discover that your faith or your trust was misplaced. And that feedback loop seems to be missing when it comes to theistic claims, when people are using faith or they have faith that their God is real.
Well, I wouldn't say so, but perhaps for some people. But I would say that a person could have faith in the existence of God. One could have faith in personal experience or revelation that God gives to someone. And if God does exist and he's all powerful, he's capable of doing that. But as I said before, I think that would fall in the category of where someone could know something is true, but be unable to show that to other people. I also think that a person could have, when it comes to having faith, we have evidence for things, but ultimately we still have to put trust in that assembled evidence especially when we make decisions or actions. Timothy McGrew gives an example of, you could have a copious amount of evidence that when you go skydiving, you will safely land on the ground. But then you still have to, the leap of faith is you have to jump out of the plane. It can't merely be hope, because if you just hope you get to the ground safely, I'm going to stay inside that plane. But the faith would be, I've seen this evidence, yet I still have to make some kind of an action. Now, you might reply, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that, well, it's a testable prediction. You're either going to get down safely or you won't. Although I could reply that one's faith in God is a testable prediction, that after death, he's either there or there's nothing. So
So I have a refined definition of faith that I left off just for brevity, but I'll add it.
Sure.
I think faith is untestable trust in this lifetime. So I left that off just because I didn't know if we would go there and just wanted to keep it brief. But yeah, I mean, how can we actually figure out if it's really true in this lifetime? How can we figure out if our trust in that claim was misplaced in this lifetime? I'm jumping out of an airplane. I think that's a testable proposition in this lifetime. Now, I may not be alive to actually see the results of the faith or the trust that I had in jumping out of the airplane and in the equipment. Somebody else could probably do that after the fact to say, Anthony's faith was really misplaced there. He really trusted that equipment. So maybe trusted in this lifetime by yourself or for other people might be the full definition of that word.
But then we're in the duration of one's existence within this space-time universe.
Yeah.
Because it's possible one might have existence after death. Life after death is something that has been debated among philosophers, theologians, and people for a long time. Let me go to a larger issue here, because I think that if we're talking about the existence of God and whether God exists, I think that if we treat it purely as a scientific question, I'm concerned we're using the wrong set of tools to answer the question, and that there are other very large questions about reality that science is not capable of answering. That the requirements of repeatable, testable, we could add in observable, measurable. To me, and those all work for inquiry into science, which deals with that science is all about providing physical or natural explanations for observed phenomena. But what if it's the case that we have questions, we have valid questions that science couldn't possibly answer? For example, are there other possible worlds that exist, not just planets, but other dimensions or universes that are causally disconnected from our own?
Like a supernatural realm, or
not
or
just supernatural,
strictly...
but I mean like to treat it loosely, like parallel Earth, parallel universes, other existences where there's people like you or me, like there's another parallel Earth where it's reversed. You're the Christian and I'm the atheist street epistemologist in this parallel Earth that's causally disconnected from our own. So we can't ever access it, but it's still very real. That there's a view in philosophy called modal realism. I think David Lewis is behind it, saying that when we talk about possibilities and counterfactuals, the reason those things are true, like if I said, if you had emailed me an hour ago, I wouldn't be in the studio right now, or I wouldn't have done something. People say, well, how do you know these counterfactuals are true? We can't test them. Never really happened. Lewis's answer is, well, they have happened. Every possible world really has real existence. Or is this a simulation? Or do I have a mind? Or which moral theory is true? My point is that do you think that there are questions that people will debate and may not be able to resolve quickly because they're not scientific questions?
I mean, I think there will always be questions that we just don't have the ability to answer, whether we use a scientific, through the scientific method, I suppose. Now, interestingly, if I were to take something on faith, which I'll just use my definition if that's okay, this idea of untestable trust, I might be able to conclude that anything is true by taking it on faith that it's the case. And that I think underscores the problem with faith, as I'm defining it at least.
Right, but then I guess I would say is why I would ask the question, why do you have faith in the thing that you have faith in? That even if one couldn't test it, because the way you say test, I mean, it sounds like I can't test to find out if my faith at a particular moment is well placed. Like with the parachute example, you know, I just find out after I jump out of the plane, or you find out at a later point if you were making a prediction about the future or something like that. But it could also be the case that I have faith in something that is an untestable prediction that even if we couldn't resolve it, it's still justified. I'll give you one example. Might be this. I think many people have faith that they have free will. Okay, that they can freely choose to do what they ought to do. But that's a hotly contested issue in philosophy. Or some people may say, I believe free will and naturalism or the physical universe are not, they're not contradictory to one another. Even atheists disagree about that one. But it seems like there's no way we could scientifically resolve these issues. It's just some people say, I just know I can choose to do it, and I have faith because it just seems that way to me. Right. It seems like someone's rational if they go through with that, even if they can't test it to resolve it. You see what I'm getting at?
I think so. The challenge, though, with faith, I think, though, is that you could have two individuals who come to different conclusions with regards to free will, who will say that they're taking it on faith that it's the case. And that's the problem. But also, faith can lead us to conclude that anything is the case.
But that doesn't seem right to me, because also people use science, or well, let's take with free will, they're using philosophy and reason. Like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett have very different views about whether free will and determinism are compatible. So they're both using logic and reason, yet they end up at different conclusions. That doesn't show that logic, reason, or philosophy are bad just because people end up at different conclusions. Someone just might make an error along the way.
Yeah, and I think probably the best way that we can resolve the question whether or not we have free will or not is probably through the scientific method, actually looking to see what's going on in our brains. Are our brains responding to stimuli before we even recognize that our brains did that? I mean, I would think that the the best way to figure out the answer to that is probably through a rigorous scientific method of testing and repeatability and seeing if you can duplicate the results on the other side of the world, for example.
Right, but I think that even if you do scientific analyses of issues, like you can use science to see, like even if you had a perfect scientific description of the world, you would still make different inferences about what is actually going on. Like when you and I said, you know, we have a perfect scientific description of what happens when we say the words, Jesus, heal me, and someone gets healed. You know, then we have to make an inference. Is it God? Is it a powerful being doing this? Like, what would you do if we prayed repeatedly for something very particular and a person got worse? What would we conclude then? All scientifically we could conclude was all we
I'm
could.
I'm going to have to use that next time I interview somebody. That's
sure,
a good one.
Because then we could just scientifically conclude in that case is uttering prayers leads to negative health outcomes. But that's all, like science. That's the stopping point with science. Everything beyond that would be like a philosophical interpretation, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure I followed you completely there. I guess.
Like we couldn't scientifically show God is punishing people or God is making people sick because prayers are uttered. All we could say, either whether they get better or worse, the uttering of prayers leads to the uttering of prayers leads to a particular health outcome.
Yeah,
and then after that, and it's similar. Like if we talk about free will, it's like, well, when a stimuli is observed, this neurochemical reaction occurs in the brain. And then this motor response happens. But then people have different kinds of, you know, replies and interpretations for what's going on. In fact, I'd recommend for you and your listeners or others on this subject, a book that I like is by Alfred Mele, I don't know if it's Mele, M-E-L-E. The book is called Free, Why Science Hasn't Disproved Free Will. That I think that's basically my concern when Christians and atheists are talking to each other. That for me, it should just seem like, well, like for me, the reason I believe in God is that, well, I observe things in the world, like the fact that the world does not have to exist. Things have explanations for why they exist, and then follow just a chain of reasoning back. I see the existence of God. It's not a scientific question because we're not dealing with a material thing in the universe. When we deal with immaterial things, it's philosophical, whether it's minds, morality, God, parallel universes, free will. And so here we just have to take things we believe to be true and we assemble them into arguments and we reach various conclusions. Some people conclude God exists, some people don't. I'm just concerned that some people think that that's not a valid way to arrive at understanding reality. But I think it is, even if people disagree. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, it sounds like you're saying that, correct me if this isn't what you're saying, but it sounds like you're saying you have determined or you're assuming that there's an immaterial world.
No. I'm saying if there are immaterial realities.
Oh, I see. If there are. Okay.
If there are,
that's the bridge. That's the bridge that I'm not willing to go across with you on. I mean, I suppose it's conceivable that there's an immaterial world or there's a supernatural realm. How can we actually figure out if that's the case?
Right. What I would say here is I think it's a valid question to ask. And this actually divides people who are atheists. Like, is everything that exists physical? Like, being an atheist is not the same thing as being a materialist or a physicalist. Because there are atheists who will say, well, there are immaterial emergent properties, that minds really do exist, but they're always tethered to the physical brain in some way. And there's some atheists who will say, no. There's only atoms and physical things. Anything else is an illusion. And I think, though, that there's no scientific way that's a philosophical dispute. And people will look at different arguments and see which is compelling to them. Same with free will and the other stuff. Like, there's no scientific way to, like, how could you scientifically detect the immaterial? It's like using a metal detector to find a red plastic cup. You know, we'd have to.
I might be able to take it on faith that it exists.
Faith in what?
Faith that the immaterial world is, or the supernatural realm is real. That's the great thing about faith, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way, is that it can allow us to to believe things that are true when we don't have good reasons for thinking that it's the case.
Sure, but that could be any kind of method that certain kinds of methods could dispose people to that. For example, as I said before, there are different ways, obviously, of determining truth, and there's always trade-offs in determining truth. Like, if you use testable, repeatable, scientific, gold standard experiments, you've got high degree of certainty. The problem is the trade-off there is it's really hard to apply that in everyday life, you know? So it's like, you know, are you doing the group project? You'll get that on Friday? Sure. Well, we got to do a gold standard testable, you know, so we can have things that are really reliable, but the trade-off is they're not applicable. They're not, you know, well, it's just not, it doesn't have a lot of utility for us.
Sure.
And so what I would say then is when we're trying to resolve different questions, that science has the benefit of, especially in the hard sciences, of high degrees of confidence, but its applicability can be very limited. And so I think that the question is, well, if there are the only things that exist are physical, I think you're going to have a philosophical debate about that. Oh, let me get back to, you were saying, like, I agree with you. If you just say, I have faith, yeah, it's a cop-out. I agree. That's why I think it's better you could just put trust in there, because if someone says, I have trust, my follow-up's going to be, well, you have trust in what? And then we can say, what's the merit of the thing you have trust in? Whether it's a personal experience, an argument, whatever that might be.
If somebody, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go right ahead.
If somebody says that they have faith or trust, the question that I would ask is, how can we actually test it to see if it's the case? And that's usually where we discover that it's not testable. And that's the delineation between the faith that we might use, that I was going to be here today, or that the parachute that I would survive the jump with the equipment that was prepared for me before I jumped. Now that seems to be the big delineation between the way that theists and I guess not atheists too possibly could be using faith. I might have faith that there's a spirit that doesn't go away after my loved ones die. I might take it on faith. I can't test it, but I trust that it's the case. I think that's the big distinction here.
It is, but I would say here that what you've added to it, saying that, well, it's a trust we can't test, it seems to include the assumption that we should not trust in things that are not testable. And I would just say, well, I don't think
exactly.
we should.
You nailed it.
But the problem there is that there may be, for example, like say if we're going to go skydiving, yeah, it's testable, but only after the fact in a way that I won't enjoy. Great. It was testable, but it wasn't, the results did not come at a time that would have been opportune for me to make a better decision about going skydiving.
Right.
That's the problem that at least testable, I think, means like scientifically testable. But
or not even, like, it doesn't have to be a rigorous science. There doesn't have to be a huge cost here. Like the example of me joining you today, that you didn't have to pay scientists to do a study. You can just check to see if I was responding to you on Skype, and the internet happened to be up, and all these other factors. These are things that we can test to our satisfaction. Now,
I think there's a difference though between a lack of it. I think it's fine to believe things and to trust in various kinds of experiences or evidences one might have. The problem would arise if we trust in something in the face of obvious counter evidence to that. So, for example, if you didn't log on to Skype and I was just sitting here talking to nobody, but I trust that you're really there, even though all of the evidence suggests you have not logged on and we're not having a conversation right now, because I've deluded myself into thinking we're talking, that would be a very problematic kind of trust. But I don't think that I haven't seen atheists put forward that kind of countervailing evidence that would make trust in either the personal experience of God or arguments for his existence that would make it irrational. See the difference between like absence of evidence or the presence of countervailing or counterbalancing evidence?
Yeah, I think I follow you. Here's what I've noticed, though, in talking to so many people when I'm doing street epistemology, is that theists seem to require faith to verify the evidence that they think that they have. That the evidence that they have alone isn't good enough. They need to assemble it all. It's the thing that you need to really be able to accept it. And that's why I have so many issues with faith. This idea of untestable trust. Are there some things that I take on faith? Like, so I hate to keep throwing up different examples, but if you'll just allow me here,
yeah.
If you told me that you had a dog, and I have no reason to doubt you, I guess I could trust that that's the case.
Right.
Is it testable? Yes. I mean, I could pay somebody who's your neighbor to walk over and verify it for me, or maybe I just show up on your doorstep, and even then you may have a dog, but maybe your dog's sitting it or something. I'm willing to accept things even though I'm not actually going out and testing them.
It's not practical to do so.
It's impractical. It's impractical
well,
to do
there
it.
could also be cases, because much of what we know comes from testimony, especially if we look at truths of history, for example, both ancient or long-term history, or even recent. I remember once I was having a debate online with a guy about ethics. We were talking about Peter Singer. And I said, well, I actually met Peter Singer once, and I asked him this, and this is the response he gave. And the guy said, well, you're lying. That never happened.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, that's cool.
Kind of rude.
That's cool. So, but there, it's like, in that case, like, I don't see how he could believe me. And I've believed people who've said that they've met certain individuals and talked to them. I might be credulous or skeptical of maybe some claims, but there's no way. He would just have to take that testimony based on his assertion of my trustworthiness, but it's something he wouldn't be able to test. Not even that it's impractical. It would be impossible because it's a testimony about a past historical event. So even there, we have to believe things, and we have faith or confidence in others, and we would just say we wouldn't be able to test it. We just make it based off, well, why do you have faith that Trent really talked to Peter Singer? Well, he has a reliable track record of being honest, and he doesn't give off a skeezy vibe to me, and, you know. So I think that's why I'm just concerned about that. Sometimes we'll apply the testability criteria to religious claims, but then other claims get more of a pass, whether it's the trivial ones like testimony,
like
or,
a dog, yeah,
or the larger philosophical ones. Like, I think there are, like, someone who believes life is worth, propositions like life is worth living. I have free will. I ought to do good and avoid evil. Once again, there's a lack of a testability here. They're philosophical questions that a person's justified in believing because they seem to be true based on foundational beliefs, and they move forward, you know? So I think God might be closer to that stuff, kind of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that seems to be just a leap that I'm not prepared to make. Like, whether you claim you have a dog or this parachute's going to hold me, I would like to have evidence to support it and be able to test it to see if that's really the cause, if that's the explanation. And it seems like if I just take something on faith, then that's the get out of jail free card.
Well,
I suppose.
not even on faith. I mean, once again, faith there to me is just, it is a trust in another person or thing, even if we have reached a conclusion based on evidence or arguments. So, I mean, I could put forward a logical argument for the existence of God. We're not going to we're already going late anyways. I mean, and that's not the point of our conversation to get into a debate on that. But I could put forward various arguments, like, you know, here's a premise: the world has motion and change and contingency, and I go to these different conclusions, and they follow rationally, and there's no fallacy in the reasoning, and then there's the conclusion. So it seems to me, is it a valid method to use the philosophical method? Like, there's a scientific method. The philosophical method would just be, we have propositions, truths, and then logical chain of reasoning that arrives at conclusions. And that's good for resolving these disputes about immaterial things that aren't natural processes, like the nature of free will, minds, morality. Because, you know, there's different moral theories that are out there, different mathematical theories. And so we have to do this philosophical method. I think that philosophical method, it doesn't give us the same confidence as science, but it's more applicable, and it can give us confidence as long as the premises are true and there's no error in the reasoning. So I think that philosophical method, like we leave faith out of this, like following that, I think that can be a good method to figuring out the way the world is.
I actually did want to ask you one more question about faith, if that's okay.
Sure. Then I do want to get your thoughts on the philosophical method.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Yeah, so go ahead.
You're kind of outside of my wheelhouse there, but
Sure. Go ahead.
Could somebody conclude that something is true strictly on faith and no evidence whatsoever?
I wouldn't know what that would mean, because for me, faith is a kind of trust. So they would have to be trusting in something.
Yes.
Now,
could somebody trust that God is real with no evidence whatsoever? Can they take it on faith that God is real with no evidence?
Well, I think there are two alternatives here. At the very basic level, they could have a kind of apprehension of the world, in that from how the world appears to them, that they observe the world, they have a knowledge of their personal interior self, and it just hits them that this proposition, there is a transcendent cause beyond all of this. To me, that would be a faith, but the evidence would be things that they observe. There would be an inference they would make based on...
Oh, I see. Even if they said, I don't have evidence for it, and I'm taking it on faith that God is real, you would still argue that they're using some evidence of some sort.
Yeah, that they're not necessarily making a philosophical argument. That they are... That said, there's two different ways to answer this question. I would say that at the very least, once again, they're not just having faith in faith. That's like trust and trust. They're trusting in either a personal subjective sense of something, or just apprehending the world, the same as you might apprehend the world and look around and see babies playing at a playground and say, life is worth living. They're not making a very rigorous philosophical conclusion, because I've read philosophers who have made the conclusion life is not worth living, actually. And they make a very rigorous argument that's hard to refute in that regard. There was a book, I forget the name of the author, it was called Better to Have Never Been Born. It's his philosophical argument that life is actually not worth living.
It's funny, you were asking if I interviewed atheists. I interviewed an atheist woman who takes the anti-natalist position. I think that's what you're describing there.
Yes, that's, yes, go on.
Anti-natalism. And we ended up having a good talk. It was great. And I have to edit that and put that online.
It was.
I don't know. I don't want to go too much into that.
It was David Benatar wrote the book Better to Have Never Been. So it's and so there for me it's like I think someone could be justified in believing life is worth living even if they never read Benatar's book, in just that they just apprehend the world around them. Now I think is it good evidence? It's not super strong. So that would be one option for this person who says I just have faith God exists. I would say, well, they're trusting in just a very thin inference they're making from what they observe around them based on human being, subjective interior sense of self, or looking at the external world. The other option may be if someone says, well, I just have faith God exists, is that they're making a purely pragmatic decision. They're just saying, I am going to trust that God exists. I don't have evidence one way or the other, but I'm going to believe that proposition is true because that makes my life better overall, and I don't see a cost in believing that proposition. And so I'm going to believe it, even in the absence of evidence. I'm going to trust it, yes, for a pragmatic reason. It's a pragmatism. I get
value from the belief,
yes,
essentially.
Much the same with believing. I think that a good parallel to that would be believing I have free will, would be another one, or believing the world is not a simulation. Even if I've read Nick Bostrom's paper saying, yep, it's definitely a simulation. Well, this is a hard argument here, but you know what? I'm going to say it's not a simulation. So I would say with that it's okay. I think it's okay to make these kinds of pragmatic beliefs as long as there's not present evidence that would rebut the belief. Like if you're a straight 50-50. So I think Pascal's wager, this is kind of what's related to Pascal's. I don't know if you come across the wager a lot in your conversations.
I do.
Yeah. So
not that much, honestly, but it comes up.
I think the wager is often misinterpreted a lot. The wager, it's not how Pascal meant it. It's not, I'm going to believe in God so I don't end up in hell. That actually wasn't Pascal's argument. His argument was more, well, look, it's not going to cost you anything to believe in God. And if you do believe, there are these benefits. So why not believe? If you are 50-50 and the only options available to you are Christianity and atheism. And so that was Pascal's argument. So it avoids the wrong hell problem, the which God problem. And so I think that, for example, I was reading a study once on free will, and there was this Israeli scientist, and he wrote a paper on it, and he said, he said that we've done studies and people are more likely to cheat in an experiment if they read an article saying they don't have free will. So he said, we need to tell people free will exists even if it doesn't, because
just so they'll behave better.
So they'll be, because we've done these testable studies that people behave worse when they are told that they don't have free will. Now, I think that's not an excuse for actually investigating the question. I think there's good reasons to believe we have libertarian free will. But I think if you were like struggling with it and you're like, man, I'm 50-50 on this. If I believe we don't have free will, I'll be depressed and terrible. If I believe I do, I could have a fulfilling life, and there's no obvious evidence to counter that thesis. Go ahead. And so I think you can make a similar pragmatic argument for God in a very narrow set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. I do think that there are people who they think they need to have a perspective, whether it's about free will or God existing, in order to be good. Possibly because they've just never considered the alternative, or it's just been drilled into them that if you don't think God is real, you're going to be a bad person.
Right. And I don't believe that.
Okay, good. Because
there are
so many people.
Yeah, there are many people. I believe that morality has a connection to God, but I believe that persons have internal moral compasses that allow them to follow a moral law, even if they don't have explicit knowledge of God. Much like people can have mathematical intuitions, even if they've never taken math classes before. So I believe there are many atheists who really do put Christians to shame, quite honestly, with their moral code. But I think that the question of believing, being moral based on your personal beliefs is different than what makes moral truths true or not, you know?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, this is something that I run into a lot with people when I interview them, that there seems to be a couple of sticking points that they think that you can't be good without a God or anything along those lines. And it seems like you're not viewing it in exactly that way, and that's good. I think it's important for people to realize that things probably wouldn't change that much in your life if you discover that you don't have a good reason for thinking that this is true, or you decide, I don't know if I could just take this on faith and take it on trust, or possibly even testable trust if you accept my definition of it, or your listeners do. There's also some value into saying I don't know when we don't know the answer to things, rather than just saying I'm going to go with it because I get value from it. My mom and dad would just it wouldn't ruffle their feathers if I just continued to believe it, but it sure would if I didn't. So I'm just going to go ahead and go with it. I think it takes a certain amount of bravery to acknowledge when your evidence is lacking and it's just not good enough to hold a high degree of confidence that something is true. Now, there are some people who need it. I've talked to people and I've ended conversations where I don't want to challenge their view because it seems like they would literally hurt themselves or possibly other people if they didn't think that this was true. Yeah. Yeah. So there is a demographic of people who they see the value in these beliefs. They're going to keep believing in it, and it's too costly for me to question it. And then there are a lot of other people, perhaps people like yourself, that say, I want to believe true things, and I want to follow the evidence if it's there. And if the evidence is there, I'm going to believe it. And if the evidence is lacking, then I'm going to lose my confidence in that claim. And this might just come down to personality types, perhaps how we were raised, perhaps the fear of hell could be a huge motivator there.
Sure.
There's all sorts of factors at play here.
But I think that, and I agree with you, that we should have epistemic humility, that when we are in a position where we don't know something, we ought to say that. I mean, even in the Bible, St. Paul says that our knowledge of heaven is like looking in a mirror dimly. And what he meant by that was in the ancient world, glass mirrors were just starting to be invented at around that time in history. Most mirrors were polished bronze. So if
is
you
that right?
Yeah, so that's what he means by looking in a mirror dimly. It's like, what, is the light not turned on? Like if you look in polished bronze, you can kind of see your reflection, kind of, but it's not super distinct. It's not like looking in a glass mirror. So like when people ask me what heaven is like, I'll say, well, I've got some evidence what I believe is reliable from divine revelation, but there's much that I cannot speculate on. I don't know, and other things in this life too. But so I agree epistemic humility is important, but at the same time, I also think that we operate some questions, it's not really I don't know. When it's questions like, is life worth living? Do I have free will? Is it a moral fact that I ought to do good and avoid evil? Is it a fact I ought to do this, or just an opinion that I agree with? I think that some of these questions, even if we don't resolve them, we live them out in a de facto way, kind of. And
we have to. If we're going to navigate the world, we have to make some decisions about how we're going to interact with things.
And so you're right. Yeah, so I think in some of those cases when evidence is 50-50, and that's the cases where you've surveyed the evidence and you're stuck on the fence 50-50, a pragmatic reason is justifiable, that you could have a sufficient pragmatic reason to move from an equal 50-50 position, especially on a question where you're going to make a de facto decision anyways based on how you live, how you treat other people, and things like that. So we're coming near to the end of our time together. Frankly, I could talk to you all day. Maybe I'll have to come out to Texas. Maybe we'll do a follow-up here. But I think at the end of the day, the lesson I want people to take away from our conversation is this, that whether you are a Christian or an atheist, you should be prepared to ask questions. What do you believe? The questions I tell Christians when you're in a conversation, ask the other person these two questions. What do you believe, and why do you believe it, or how did you come to that belief? Now, I don't think every belief needs to have evidence, because otherwise you'd have an infinite regress. You know, some things we believe just because they seem obviously true. But I think it's good for us to ask questions and to be open-minded and try to see truth as something we're not trying to beat each over the head with in a debate, but we're in a dialogue, walking together, as a journey, basically. And so I hope you will take from our conversation, even us in our disagreements that we have, we put forward what we believe, how we disagree, our differences, and we can learn from one another and maybe modify our positions after reflecting on what each of us has shared on that. So I don't know, you go ahead, your closing thoughts, I guess.
Very, very well said. I think I concur with most of what you said there. And I would love to meet up again in person, or maybe we can even go out and do some some street epistemology on the campus together. And
that would be fun.
Yeah, you could observe, and then maybe I bring you over and you could do it. It sounds like you're already doing a variation of it, so that's great. And I really appreciate you having me on your show and allowing me the chance to express my views and why I don't find some of the reasons that you do compelling. And I hope that your viewers
likewise, because I don't find some of your reasons compelling, but that's okay, because people can civilly disagree with one another on these important issues. I also take issue with some Christians who have criticized street epistemology. I think this method, like any method, it can be deployed in a malicious way or a manipulative way.
Yes. I agree.
So I agree. The method, but that's the fault of the person, not the method. You can use a knife. You can use a knife to cut steak or stab somebody in the back. You know. So I believe go ahead.
A tool.
Yeah.
Sorry. Street epistemology is a tool that anybody can use, and we want everyone to learn how to use it. And that's why I'm excited to be on your show, to expose this method to other people so that you will consider using it the next time you decide to engage with another Christian, perhaps, or maybe a Muslim or even an atheist. And the approach is generally friendly and productive. You're not talking past each other. And it's to get to an understanding. What does this person really believe? What is motivating them to go out and vote for that candidate as opposed to that one? What is motivating them to teach their children this rather than that? And these are important conversations that we need to have. And shutting down discourse or deplatforming people is not the way to go about doing it. Yeah. And that is one thing that I think we probably both have in common, is we see the value in discourse and airing our positions in the most honest, frank, and unobscurantist way possible. We have to do this if we're going to work together and figure out what the actual truth of the matter is.
We have to live together. There's no other way around it. We're all stuck together, and it's good for us to share this. I'll also say that SC, what you call SC, I basically call the Socratic approach. And it's SA, SE. This method, it also actually helps with children and spouses. You have to be careful though, because my wife knows that I use this when I talk with others. She's like, "You're using that Socratic method on me," So
I get the same thing.
Oh, really?
I did, I just for anyone interested, I did write a blog post on how to use street epistemology with loved ones, because generally the stakes are a little higher as opposed to a stranger on the street. You value those relationships, and that might be something your folks want to check out.
Do your loved ones ever? Do they tell you stop using your street epistemology?
Actually, I think we've gotten to the point where they use it now on themselves.
Ah, okay.
And I don't even need to say something. They may make a claim, and then I just observe them thinking about what they just said, and they're going through the steps themselves, and that's valuable.
Sure thing. All right. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us, and for our listeners, be sure to check out TrentHornPodcast.com. If you want to see more great interviews like this with non-Catholics, with good dialogue, how to learn how to engage one another, consider supporting us at TrentHornPodcast.com. Check out Anthony's work. Just go to YouTube, search Anthony Magnabosco, Street Epistemology. You won't be disappointed, and I'm going to have to, I should come out. It'd be fun to tag team for people to see that. I think that'd be enjoyable.
I'd really like doing that, Trent, and thanks for having me on your show.
Of course. Thanks for being here. Thank you, guys, and I hope everyone listening has a very blessed day.